Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here tonight as we restart I shouldn't say restart, but pick up our study of Revelation. Now, we are going to begin next week with chapter 4. If you were here for our previous sessions, we covered chapters 1 through 3 in an earlier session over this last summer, and we took a break when Impact got started. Now, if you want to go back and watch those videos, if you go to YouTube and search for Joshua Householder, My Ugly Mug's going to pop up. You can find, I have a playlist with all the videos. I think there's 11 videos of the Revelation series, and so you can watch those videos there. Tonight, I'm not going to go back, and we're not going to try and go through all 3 chapters. It took us 11 weeks to do 3 chapters, so we are not going to rush through Revelation. We're going to get as far as we do. And wherever we stop, we'll pick up there the next week, and we'll keep going. We're going to take our time as we move through. Tonight, I just kind of want to rehash, kind of a refresher for those of you who were here over the summer, or an introduction for those of you who weren't. This lesson is very much the same as our first lesson back then. We're just going to revisit some things and hopefully cover just a little bit more ground. So if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. I will do my best to answer. I am by no means an expert on the book of Revelation. And if anyone claims to be an expert in the book of Revelation, you should probably run away. Right? It is a tough book. No, like I say, no 2 commentaries will agree. No, it's complicated, which I think is part of the reason why we're still talking about it 2,000 years later, which is good. But before we dive in, let's open with the word of prayer this evening. Father God, we thank you for this day and the time we have to gather here and to study your word. Lord, as always, I pray that you will grant us wisdom as we study. Lord, help us to understand the difficult things. And Father, give us insights. We don't want to just hear the words. We want to hide them in our hearts, Lord. We want to gain understanding and wisdom. We want to draw closer to you. And so, Father, as we study, may you bless us with wisdom. And Father, I pray you'll draw us closer together and closer to you. These things I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. If anyone needs notes, they're on the back. If I need to print more, let me know. What you have on the notes is exactly what I have on my screen, minus the pictures. Okay? You just don't have the pictures, so if you're a good artist, you can doodle those in the sides when we get to them. But you have exactly what I have, so you can follow along a little easier. All right, first things first. And this is a pet peeve of mine, and one that I will hammer you on. It is revelation, singular. There's one revelation that John gave us. Okay, it's not revelations, revelation. Okay, this is kind of like what someone says, Psalms 23. No, it's psalm. It's one psalm. It's a singular song. Okay, same thing with Revelation. It is the revelation of the Apostle John. Okay, not revelations, not plural. One. All right, and we need to understand that as we look at Revelation, as I said just a moment ago, it is the single most difficult and controversial book in the Bible. Now, you might think, well, controversial is not a word we should use for the Bible, but there is a lot of controversy. If you have 2 people in a room, they'll have 3 different opinions on the book of Revelation. Okay? There's no 2 commentaries that I have ever read on any subject in Revelation that fully agree 100% with what the other commentary said. And I'm going to strive as we move forward to be objective. I know there's a lot of different opinions. There's a lot of different viewpoints. We're going to cover terms like premillennial, amillennial, postmillennial. We're going to be looking at, different this and that. I'm going to try my best to stay neutral, present the scripture, and then we'll break it down and say, well, if you're in this camp, it'll probably look like this. If you're in this camp, it'll probably look like that. So my job is not to tell you what I think. My job is to tell you what the Bible says, and you can figure out what to think on your own. All right? That's kind of where I am. And if I stray from that and you feel like I'm straying, we can have conversations civilly, and I appreciate that. I'm here to learn just as much as you are. Okay? Every time I read the book of Revelation, I see something new, like the rest of the Bible. So if you've got an insight, something, say, hey, I was reading, and this really came to my heart. Tell me. Tell us about it. Share it, okay? Because we're all in this together. So let's cover the basics. Okay? One thing I always say about Scripture, context, context, context. One of the most dangerous things we can do as Christians is take Scripture out of context. It's imperative that when you are on trial, your words are represented correctly, right? That's why the police tell you anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. Husbands, also with your wives in arguments, all right? Tread carefully. Anything you say can and will be used against you, all right? But you want to make sure that you're accurate. How much more important is representing the words of eternal God? He gave us books, not sentences. Okay, so we're going to look at the broader context. And I may not be able to break it down and flesh it all out in an hour-long class, but you might have homework during this class. I want you to go and read ahead of, read behind, read around. Read the whole chapter. We're not going to cover a chapter a night. We're going to cover a few verses a night, a section maybe, a couple paragraphs at most. So make sure that you understand where that fits in the theme and the flow of the book. We have to understand this is written for us, right? We have the Bible. This is written for us, but it was not written directly to us. This book was written 1900 years ago. It was written to people in a different setting, in a different culture than where we are today. So this is why context is so important. We're going to ask ourselves who, what, where, when, and why, right? Those are the questions we're all taught to ask of anything when you want to figure out what's going on. Who, what, where, when, why, sometimes how. If we can understand the target audience, we can help see it through their eyes. And that will help us to understand. If you understand who this is written to and why that was important and why it applied, well, that really helps to gain a whole lot of other understanding. If you know who's been there, who's experienced this, who was receiving this message, okay, that helps give us a little more clarity. Think about it as putting on corrective lenses when we read Scripture. So who, right? Who wrote the book of Revelation? John, right? John the Apostle. By the end of the 2nd century, he was known as John the Apostle, John the son of Zebedee, the disciple whom Jesus loved. He was half of the sons of thunder, etc., 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 okay? This, even by the start of the 2nd century, they had, as early as that, they had identified John, and they were in agreement. John the Apostle is the one who wrote this. So this is, if he wrote this, circa 90-ish, by the end of that century, all the commentary on the book of Revelation, this letter that we have, all point to John the Apostle. They're all in agreement. Now, other works that John wrote are Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, kind of his greatest hits there. Probably wrote other letters we just don't have, but those are the ones that have survived and we have, and I believe those are the ones that we were intended to have. So, good reads. If you haven't read all those things, take time, especially the 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, sit down and read the whole book in one sitting. It gives you a better picture, better flow, context. Now, although there is some discussion as to the when, some people put it earlier, some people put it a little bit later, I would say 90% of biblical scholars place the book of Revelation written in within 5 years on either side of 95 AD. All right, so somewhere in that ballpark, into the 1st century, we can, with, I would say, 95 to 99% certainty, all agree that was when it was written. Now, again, context. This was a time when the Christians were entering into a season of persecution. Rome was the big kid on the block. Now, everyone talks about the Pax Romana, right? The peace of Rome lasted 1,000 years, and Rome was great. Rome did a lot of great things. Yes, which is true. But Rome was the chief persecutor of the Christians. Why? Because the Christians said, we're not going to bow down and worship the emperor. That was a big sticking point. They would say, you can worship your God and the emperor, but you have to worship at least the emperor. And the Christians would say, no. There was a lot of persecution over emperor worship. So we had these periods. We had Nero from 54 to 68. You had Vespasian from 69 to 79, and then Domitian from 81 to 96. These were like periods of intense persecution for the church. And they got progressively worse. And so for the people now who are in this season of immense persecution, that's who's getting this book of Revelation that talks about all this bad stuff's going to happen. It's not like there were people like us who were sitting here. We got things that are pretty easy. I mean, people might call us names or make fun of us because we go to church, but we're not really persecuted. Literally, they were giving their lives. Their children were being executed in front of them. They were being crucified because they were Christians. And it was to those people that received this letter. So where was it written? Well, it was written on Patmos, which is probably a Roman penal colony. We don't know exactly for sure, but again, as best as we can tell, it was used as a penal colony, a prison, right? A prison without walls. They're a lot cheaper than building walls around prisons. If you could put someone on an island and they can't get anywhere, they're kind of stuck. Very efficient. And so Patmos is that little island. I don't know if you can see it in the red dot. This little tiny speck right here, okay? That is Patmos, that little tiny island. You can still visit the island today. There is a monastery on the island, and you can actually go to the cave where they believe that John lived when he was on the island. It's pretty neat. I've not been, but I have friends that have been, and they tell me it's a pretty neat experience. So again, we got the who, the where, the when. Let's ask why. Why was this written? Why was this important? First and foremost, because God said, John, write this down. Okay, that's the big why. But secondly, again, Rome was ramping up their efforts to enforce emperor worship. This was huge. If you were a part of a polytheistic group that believed in many gods, sure, what's one more, right? You can add in another god. We'll just put Caesar on the side. Even a lot of the Jews who were monotheistic, they had kind of capitulated and said, okay, sure, we'll revere the emperor. But the Christians maintained there is one God, and we will not honor any other gods except for the one. And Rome was really tightening the screws on the church. And so they would not bow to the emperor. Now, when we read the book of Revelation, yes, it warns of impending persecution. Bad stuff is coming down the pipes. But there's also imminent victory. Yes, the bad stuff is going to happen, but God is still in control, and at the end of the day, he wins. Right? Satan has a little bit of time to do his stuff, but at the end of the day, God wins. We have that assurance of victory in the end. So it encourages hope and endurance until our time comes to an end, right? So, what are we looking at with Revelation? This is what is a big, because it's a multifaceted what, right? First, it's a book of prophecy. These things are going to happen. A prophecy is a voice directly from God to the people, and it's a message from God about events coming in the future. All right, so you have the prophet who says, hey, this is a message from God, and he brings a word of prophecy. Another use of the word prophecy or prophesy is Sunday mornings when someone gets up and they preach, right? That's a word of prophecy. This is what God says. This is his message from the Bible. That's that kind of same principle. But then there's also the other side of this is what's going to happen in the future. Now, there are a lot of false prophets. In fact, we're warned about quite a few of those throughout the New Testament, especially in Revelation. Beware of false prophets. And there are very specific instructions on what to do to false prophets. The ones who stand up and say, hey, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. Okay, well, if it doesn't happen just like they said it would, then you're supposed to stone them to death. Right? God has no space for false prophets. He does not like liars. That breaks his heart. And so for someone to be a prophet and speak prophecy, this is a high office, right? This is something to be taken very seriously. It's also a book about apocalypse, right? It's an apocalyptic book. Now, apocalypse literally means an unveiling or revelation. If you look at some older translations of the Bible, it'll say the apocalypse of John, right? Not the revelation, it'll say the apocalypse. It's the same word, right? It literally means revelation. It's an understanding. It involves other players and components along with God's message. So it's not just, hey, this is what God says. It's here's what God says, and here's how everyone else is going to react to this. It brings another character onto the board, so to speak. And another feature of apocalyptic literature is it is highly symbolic. It's kind of like poetry in a way. If you read the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs, your forehead's like a pomegranate, and your neck is like a crumbling tower, and your teeth are like that's one ugly woman. If you ever seen a picture, look up picture of the woman from Song of Solomon. That's one ugly woman. I'm just going to throw it out there. If you take it literally, well, wow, okay? There are a lot of terms, a lot of ideas that are very symbolic, especially with the numbers. I had one professor tell me every number in Revelation is symbolic. Now, I don't know if every number is symbolic, but you get the idea. They all have, this is what it says, right? But here's also this underlying meaning, okay? This is what it means. So let's make sure that we keep our eyes open as we move forward. And it's also a book of eschatology, which means a study of the end. So, like I say, as what it is, yes, it is one book, but it is also these three things. It's different styles of literature all packed into one. It's like the Swiss Army knife of Bible books. Okay, it's got a little bit of everything in there. Now, let's look at what it is not, because this is just as important as what it is. Okay, it is not Charles Dickens. It is not a Western novel that is written in a linear story fashion. Right? We like beginning, middle, end. That's how we as Western people perceive the world. That's how we perceive time, beginning, middle, end. This was not written by a Western man living in a Western society. This was written by an ancient Near East man living in the ancient Near East culture. And they viewed time and they viewed literature differently than we do. We can't read it the same way we read modern literature because it's not what it is. And it is also not a work of fiction. This is not just something that John made up on an LSD trip. John speaks very clearly about what he has seen, and he testifies to this being the truth. God testifies to this being the truth. So this is the absolute truth written in a form that we're not familiar with. It is also not written about America. I love this country. I would bleed on the flag to keep the stripes red. But America is not mentioned anywhere in the Bible. Okay? So we need to take off our America glasses and stop thinking like Americans, because right or wrong, we tend to be a little egocentric. Everything has to be about us in some way. No. This has nothing to do with America. It has to do with the church. You just happen to live in America. All right? I want us to look at this objectively. And again, I love America. I'm not saying anything bad about America, but this is not about America. I can't tell you how many times I've heard guys talk about, well, this is this, and this is Russia because Russia's come against America, and this. No, it's not. This is about the church, and this is about God, and this is about the enemy, and how all three interact throughout these last days. All right? And it's also not a timeline of events for us to argue about. Okay? The book of Revelation was not meant for us to sit here, well, I think it means this. Well, I think it means... Look, we have enough stuff to disagree about. Hey, did you guys watch the election yesterday? There. That's enough to disagree about, okay? I want us to consider the book of Revelation a secondary doctrine. And what I mean by secondary doctrine is not that it's unimportant, but it's not required for salvation, right? You don't have to agree with me on the book of Revelation in order to get saved. A primary doctrine is a belief in Jesus Christ, that he was born of a virgin, that he lived a perfect life, he suffered, he died under Pontius Pilate, he was crucified and buried, and on the third day he rose again. He sent the Holy Spirit, he's convicting us of sin. Those are all primary things, right? That's the big things that we need to understand and agree on to be saved. Regardless of what denomination we're in, regardless of what brand of Christianity, that's universal. This we can disagree on and still be okay. It's important, but it's not what we hang our hats on as far as our salvation. You're not going to hell if you disagree with me, okay? So, before we move forward, any questions on that? I know I'm trucking through this because I want to make sure that we get to the end. And I think we're going to have time at the end for questions too. But any questions so far on Revelation?
One question.
Bob.
When you say it's not linear, does that mean there's no relative timing involved in it, or does it start at the end, go to the middle, jump to the beginning?
That's a great question, Bob, and actually I'm going to fix it to answer that with this next section. You are our, that is a great segue. Thank you. Bob and I practiced ahead of time. So, in regards to time, we view time as linear. Okay, and I do want to talk about this a little bit more. We look at things as beginning, middle, end. There was, there is, there will be. Right? That's how we view things. We watch our movies, we look at our stories, we start at the beginning of the book, we read through the middle, we get to the end. Unless you're impatient, then you read the end to figure out what happens, and then you go back and figure out the rest of it, right? That's kind of how we view things. And I don't think that is necessarily wrong in how we view things, but that's how we perceive time. As Western people in Western culture, we have a clock, right? We especially as Americans, we live and die by the clock. If you don't believe me, ask Pastor Randy, okay? We started at 6:30, maybe a little earlier, and we're going to be done by 7:30, right? Because we have something else going on. We've got things to do. So we are very much time people. And how we perceive time is a little different. One of the biggest complaints Randy has about going to El Salvador is they're not on Randy time. If they say, hey, we'll be there at noon, it might be 12:30 when they show up. And everyone else is okay with that because that's just how they perceive time. It's not that they're lazy. They just perceive time a little differently. It's how they interact with time is a little different. This is how we do it. We are very much Americans. We are hot dog people. I had a hot dog last night for dinner. You start at one end, you munch to the middle, and you munch to the end, right? And you get done, you can pick another hot dog. Okay, that's how we view time. But again, these were different people, and we have to understand the context. How they viewed time was a little bit different. Think of time as more of a spiral, right? It repeats itself as it moves forward. You've seen this. There are patterns in history. If you don't believe me, go look at the list of bad guys throughout the last 1,000 years. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong. You can go back and look at, I'm just going to throw a name out there, Ivan the Terrible, or, Attila the Hun, or you look at how they came to power, the things that were in place. They came to power. They rose to power. They achieved whatever they set out to achieve for a season. And then after a season, they waned in power and they lost popularity and then they died. And then the next guy came in and picked up. There are patterns in history. That's why we can look back and learn from our mistakes, right? If it wasn't kind of cyclical in a way, we wouldn't be able to say to our kids, hey, learn from my mistakes, or you shouldn't stick your finger in the electrical socket, right? We'd be like, I'm just excited to see what happens as he is, We have learned and we pass those lessons on, right? This happened. I learned about it. I understand what's happening. That's why it was one of my most famous quotes. Those who are ignorant of history are condemned to repeat it. Because if I know the history, I know what's going to happen. I see the writing on the wall and I say, hey, let's not do this again. Socialism right now in our country. I don't get it. Never has socialism ever worked anywhere that made a country more popular, more wealthy. People more free. There's always a reduction of freedom and an increase of debt. And then eventually it winds down to a genocide. In the last century, 5 men were responsible for more human death than all of history before that. In the 1900s, hear me, 5 men in the 1900s, in 1 century, were responsible for more human loss of life because of communism than the rest of history combined. Amen. That's a historical fact. You can track that. You can put it on paper and add it up. And yet somehow we're still thinking, we can do it better. Folks, there are patterns in history, right? We see the writing on the wall. It never works. It's our own hubris that thinks, we can do it better. Right? So, think of them as having layers in their history and in their literature, right? Now, it doesn't say the end comes before the beginning, but what we're going to see is we're going to see a progression, and then we're going to come back here, and we're going to see it again, a little bit different, but we're going to see a progression. And then we're going to come back here, and we're going to see the same kind of thing, and we're going to see the same progression. And again, this is where time gets a little wonky for us, because we want to see A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And they're seeing event, event, event. And I think what they're trying to say is pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. Hey, these things are going to happen. And so think of it like this. This is how I understand, right? I'm a fat guy. This is how I understand food, okay? What did I say we as Americans like to eat? Hot dogs. You ever been to a Jewish deli? Unless it's a Hebrew national, you can't get a hot dog at a Jewish deli, right? But you can get a nice sandwich. Layers, right? We are hot dog people. They are sandwich people, okay? They just view time as a little bit different. So as we look at Revelation, we're going to see patterns. Trumpets, scrolls, seals, And I think we need to pay attention to these things. And I don't necessarily think there's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I'm like, this is going to happen. Hey, it's going to happen. Hey, it's going to happen. The point is, it's going to happen, but God's still in control. Okay, that's the big picture. Yes, this stuff's going to happen. And God's telling you it's going to happen now, so that when it does happen, you're not surprised. You're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Well, God said it's going to happen. And this is why the Bible is still relevant 2,000 years later for the New Testament. I mean, 5,000, 6,000 years for the Old Testament. Why? Because we still see these same things happening throughout history. We still see the same patterns of humanity being poured out and God's grace being poured down. Okay? So again, as we move forward, take off our Western glasses, take off our America glasses, and let's try to look at it as the big picture. And we'll break it down a little bit. All right? Bob, does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, it helps.
Okay. All right. Any other questions about time? There's a lot of questions about time, right? Time machines and all that kind of stuff. Anybody believe in time travel? Just as a side note, anybody think it's possible, time travel? Maybe. I don't know. Like I say, we would never know. I think it was Stephen Hawking's, I think it was, had a time traveler party. And he sent out the event invitation the day after the party was planned. And he said, therefore, time travel is not true. Because if there had been time travel sometime in the future, they would have seen this invitation and come back to this date before I'd sent the invitation, because they would be seeing it after, right? So he said time travel is not true. Here's the tricky thing about time travel is the earth is not in the same place it was 100 years ago. It's not in the same place it was when I started preaching tonight, right? So, I don't know. Anyway. What's that?
That's all you have to do, get on a jet.
You know, a jet, yeah. You can time travel, go back in time across the country. All right, well, let's review the letters to the churches. We're making good time here tonight. I'm on slide 11 of 17. I think 15 is my sweet spot, if I remember correctly, for slides for an hour. But, all right, well, so just as an overview, generally speaking, each of the letters would include a personalized greeting, right? I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the Creator. I am the, right? So God would give each one of the churches a personalized greeting. Now, this greeting was unique to that church. It was like a thumbprint. And what it did is identified God with that church. It's like, I know you intimately. He's not just, hey, I'm God. How are you? Nice to meet you. He knew each one of those churches and everything that was happening intimately. And so as he introduced himself in such a way that pertained directly to that church. And again, we see that intimacy here, that intimate knowledge of God to the churches. He talked about what you're doing right for some of the churches. Not all of them. What you're doing right. Hey, you guys are doing this well. Keep up the good work. But I hold this against you. You talk about what you're doing wrong. You hold to the practices of the Nicolaitans, those evil teachers who blah, blah, blah. You do this, or you don't do this, then you should be, right? There's things you should stop doing or things you should start doing. Again, the intimate knowledge that most people wouldn't be bold enough to say out loud, right? But he would say there's always a remnant of faithfulness too, most of them. He would say, but for those of you who are doing well, keep doing this. Even though the rest of the church is going nuts, you keep doing well. And he'd give them things to fix, right? And he would I forget what was on there, but they also give them consequences if they didn't fix the things, right? You need to do this, or I'm going to come, and I'm gonna whoop you, right? I'm going to turn you across my knee because you need a good paddling. There's discipline involved. And it's something we don't like is people. We don't like to be disciplined. We don't like to be fussed at if we mess up. We never have. As children, we didn't like it when we got paddles, right? My dad had the Persuader. It was a 2x6 deck board with a handle. Said, spare the rod, spoil the child. I got one pack with it, right? Ow! You put it on top of the refrigerator. I knew where it was and what it could do. That was the last spanking I ever got, right? Because I didn't want the consequences of those bad choices. I knew the consequences. I knew they would hurt. God doesn't say, hey, you guys better shape up or else. He says, this is the consequences, and he spells it out. He gives them the choice. He says, I want you to do this. This is my heart. I want you to be a church that loves me. But if you choose not to do that, here are the consequences. It's not a threat. It's an explanation. God doesn't have to make threats. He just says, hey, look, this is the consequences of this choice. Right? Because God is omniscient. He's separate from time. He sees past, present, future all at once. He knows what's going to happen. He says, if you continue down this path, this is what's going to happen. Right? If you may have heard the story of the two preachers standing out by the side of the road. One guy holding up a sign says, the end is near. And another one says, turn around now, or turn back now, right? And this truck comes rolling by. Get off the road, you crazy, holy rollers. All of a sudden you hear, as the truck speeds around a corner, a loud screeching of the brakes and then a pause and a splash. One guy sits there, maybe we should just have a sign that says bridge out ahead, right? It's not a threat, hey, you better turn around or you're going to be in trouble. It's like, hey, the bridge is out ahead. If you keep going down this road, you're going to fall off, right? That's what God does for the churches. He's not shaking it, you better do this. He's saying, look, I love you, and this is what's going to happen if you keep going down this path, right? We have these conversations with our kids. Hey, I found a joint in your backpack. I just want to tell you, if you keep going down this road, it's going to open the door for other things and lead you to places you never wanted to be, right? Hey, this girl you're dating, dude, I know you think you're in love with her now, okay? But if you get that name tattooed on your forearm, in 6 weeks when she breaks your heart, you're going to have to go get it, okay? And I'm not saying that we've all had these conversations. I certainly haven't had them with my 7-year-old yet. But people had these conversations with me who were older and wiser and knew better. And they said, hey, look, there are patterns that I recognize from my past and my parents' past. And if you keep going down this road, this is where it's going to wind up. And you know what? I guarantee if you look back at some of the advice your parents gave you, you would probably say, yeah, they were right. I should have gone down that road. Our God is a loving Father. He is a loving and caring Father. And his desire is for that intimacy with the church. But he will not force us to do that. He says those who do follow, they're going to be rewarded, right? Here's the result. If you follow me, result is glory. It's being with me in eternity, in paradise, in heaven. That's the reward. But if you choose you don't want that, that's up to you. Here's the other alternative. Right? Now, out of the 7 churches, 5 are admonished to do better. Hey, you guys are doing okay, but man, you really got to work on this. One of them is just a complete, there's nothing good about one church. He's just like, I got nothing. You are just a complete failure on all fronts. Unplug yourself, plug yourself back in and try to restart, right? You got to start from scratch. One is, it's okay, right? He doesn't really say, hey, you guys are doing great. He just says, hey, hang in there, right? You're there, hang in there. In one church, he praises that you guys are doing great. I don't have anything against you. You're perfect. You're doing everything great. And as we look at these 7 churches, we can see a lot of same characteristics, I think, in our own lives and in our own churches. Now, here, not as much. You guys, again, I love you. You guys are wonderful and you're doing great. But don't rest on your laurels, all right? I have been at some churches, I'm like, you guys will be getting a letter, okay? You guys will be getting a letter. But you guys are doing good. And again, I don't want us to rest on that. We can always do better, right? And that's even when we encourage one church. You guys are doing great, but keep being hungry. Keep pushing ahead. Keep pushing through. There were more than 7 churches in the world at the time that Revelation was written. There were thousands of churches when Revelation was written. It was amazing. In the first century, they went from 120 people in an upper room to a worldwide event. By the time that the first century had ended, the gospel had been carried from England to India. Some say possibly as far as China by the apostles. I mean, from Africa to as far north as Russia and northern Germany. That's how far. In the first century, the church had expanded. There were churches all over Europe and Asia and Africa. But he gives us these 7 examples. And again, 7, right? It's a number. It's an important number. What does 7 represent? Completeness. Okay? So when you look at the church as a whole, hey, you're going to fit into one of these categories. Where are you guys? How are you doing better? How are you struggling? How can you improve? Okay? So again, it's a teaching tool here. God's talking to the churches as a whole, not just 7. He just kind of picks out 7, and they were on trade routes, right? They were in a circle. And as John sent these letters out to these 7 churches, as people were passing through on these trade routes, guess what they did? That's a pretty cool scroll. Can I take that with me? Yeah, great. And they travel, and they take it with them, and then the word spreads farther and farther and farther. God knows what he's doing. He knew these 7 churches on this circular trade route in Asia Minor, they were the heart of the Roman Empire. Anything that was going anywhere passed through those 7 churches. And so the message spread farther and farther and farther. If you want to make a point, if you want to get something to spread, you start in the most concentrated place and let it go out, right? You know, if you want something to happen worldwide, you're probably not going to start in Toano, Virginia, right? This is not the epicenter of world culture. Now, I love Toano, and I love it because it's not the epicenter of world culture, right? You're going to start in a place that's going to have the most traffic. Get it out there. Get it out there. That's why people have to pay so much money to put ads on Facebook. I thought the world was going to end when Facebook shut down the other day. Where were you at the Facebook shutdown? That March date, right? I thought people were going to lose their minds. I mean, when Facebook shuts down, people actually call 911, report an emergency. Facebook's down. This is a true story. There are cities that have to say, stop calling 911 because Facebook doesn't work. True story. Why do people pay millions of dollars to advertise at the Super Bowl? Because millions of people watch the Super Bowl. And if you can get your ad on the Super Bowl, boom, you have a target audience. Same thing was true, I think, here with the letter to the churches in Revelation. God knew these 7 churches, they're at the epicenter. It's even kind of football shaped as I think about it. But if I can hit those 7 churches and get this message, it's going to spread throughout the whole empire. It's going to spread throughout the whole world. God is intelligent. He knows what he's doing. But the 7 churches, 1's bad, 4, okay, you got to work on some stuff. 1, and then 1 is awesome. So there's room to improve. And so as we look at churches, especially churches today that are struggling, they're struggling with a lot of the same things that the churches back then were struggling with. Because humanity hasn't changed. We've just gotten better at being stupid humans. I mean, it's practice, yeah. As Paul said in Romans chapter 1, you invent new ways of doing evil. Like, you got bored doing evil the old ways, so you invent new ways to do bad stuff and make poor choices. So these churches, they had one overwhelming problem, and all the churches compromised with the world. That was the big problem. They compromised. They said, well, we can be 1 foot in the church and 1 foot in the world. And it failed every single time. That was the big problem, compromise. We see our denominations across the board are falling apart. Why? Because they want to compromise. The latest fatality was the United Methodist Church. We come from the United Methodist Church. We as Wesleyans, that's kind of our family heritage. Our parents got divorced. That's what happened in the UMC. As Wesleyans, our parents got divorced. Why? Because they wanted to compromise over the issue of homosexuality. I can't tell you how many UMC churches I see flying the rainbow flag out front, and it's not because they're big fans of Noah. Right? They're celebrating the very things that God destroyed the earth for that put Noah on the ark in the first place. And I'm not condemning homosexual people tonight. That's not what I'm here. But I'm saying that compromise on homosexuality is what broke the church apart. It's happened to the Methodists, it happened to the Presbyterians, it happened to the Lutherans, it happened to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That has become kind of that litmus test for conservative or traditional Christian values and progressive Christian values. I would argue there's no such thing as a progressive Christian. There's just progressive. And it's progressing in the wrong direction. And that was the problem with the churches. They wanted to compromise. And homosexuality was a big issue back then in the Roman Empire. In fact, if you were wealthy enough or high enough up in Roman status and you didn't have a gay lover on the side, people thought you were weird. Right? It was just kind of expected. You should have a wife, then you should have a lover, a female lover, at least, or maybe even a gay lover on the side. That was just part of the culture, right? It's all about self-indulgence. And Rome got so big and so fat it had a heart attack and died of self-indulgence. That's what happened to the Roman Empire. And that's what was happening to the churches. They were getting fat on the sins of the world, and they were skinny on the important things of God, and they were dying. They were unhealthy. If you want to look more at one of the specific groups that were called out were the Nicolaitans, who believed that you could save your soul but party in your body, right? It was a lot like the Gnostics. John and Peter and Paul talked about the rise of the Gnostics early on in the first century. The Gnostics believed that as long as your soul was saved, your body was going to be destroyed because it was evil, because it was created and it had been tainted by sin. So as long as your soul was saved, that was important. So from there you went to one of two camps. You either punished your body because it was evil, right? You would whip yourself and starve yourself. That asceticism was what that's called, was picked up by the Catholic Church, right? Well, you've sinned, so you have to punish yourself. You have to climb up these stairs on your knees while saying the Hail Marys in order for God to forgive you. You have to flog yourself so many times. Martin Luther, right, the guy who started the Protestant Church, the Protestant Reformation, he used to flog himself to show God how sorry he was for his sins, to show God that he was really serious about wanting to get saved and being forgiven. And finally, his mentor says, you cannot save your soul by punishing your body. It's not how it works. Well, that Gnosticism, that Nicolaitan belief, is still alive in the church today, right? There's still that compromise. It's just deeply seated now. The other side was what I would call a perversion of what our Calvinistic brothers and sisters believe. Well, I got saved when I was 4 years old, so I can live like whatever now, and I'm going to go to heaven. Well, Jimbo, you're cheating on your wife, you're drinking 14 beers a night, and you're smoking 6 packs of cigarettes a day. Well, I got saved when I was 12 up there at the Baptist church, and I'm going to go to heaven. Are you, buddy? I don't know, because the fruit that I'm seeing is not good fruit. I'm not judging their walk. I'm just saying the fruit that I see is not the fruit of the Spirit. And there's a danger in that say, well, I got saved when I was such and such, and I'm going to do whatever I want now. No, even John Calvin would slap you if he heard you say that. Right? That's not what he said. Again, context is important. He believed that if someone was truly, honest to goodnessly saved, they would lose their entire appetite, and they would lose the ability to ever sin again. Their lives would not be a reflection of the world, but from that moment forward, they would be totally sold out for God. And I understand that. But there's this same idea from the first century that's still alive today. Well, my soul is saved, so I can live however I want to in my body. And there's a lot of people, good people, who go to church and they're still going to hell. Why? Because they have compromised with the world. This is a no-compromise situation here. Again and again and again, in every letter, overcome, persevere, endure to the end. He who overcomes these obstacles until the end. He who endures to the end. He who perseveres to the end will be saved, right? That's the repeated phrase again and again and again. Overcome, persevere, endure. Not sit back and wait to be delivered. Not sit back and wait for Jesus to come back. In spite of the persecution, in spite of the bad stuff that's happening, in spite of all the rest of the stuff we're talking about, I expect you, the church, to overcome, persevere, and endure through the strength of God. Not on your own. I understand you can't do it on your own. That's why you're failing. Let me strengthen you. Let me give you grace. Let me give you the help that you need to overcome. But I expect you to stand strong until the end. Even Jesus, in his prayer, that great prayer you read in John, he prayed for himself, he prayed for his disciples, and he prayed for those who would come after. That's us, right? He did not pray that they would be delivered. He prayed that they would be united, that we would be united, we would be one. Why? Because one is stronger together than they are all separate. And we have to stand together or we're going to fall. Here we see Jesus speaking to the churches. And he is saying, I need you to stand together, to stand uncompromisingly, lest you fall. unless you continue down that same path. So press on despite the persecution. Any questions on the letters to the churches? Again, that was 11 weeks in about 11 minutes. Okay. What?
You said 11 weeks and 11 minutes. I said time travel.
Time travel. There we go. One thing I did not hit on, and I've got a few minutes, I'm going to hit on it here real quick. Already, by the end of the 3rd chapter, we have seen several references back to the Old Testament. The way with Jesus is described in chapter 1. Hair like wool, eyes of fire, sword coming out of his mouth, bronze feet, flowing white robes, golden sack, right? That picture of Jesus is not the anemic Jesus we see with blonde hair and blue eyes who was baptized in the Chemung River, whatever, right? That's the American Jesus. The Jesus that we see in the New Testament or in Revelation was so terrifying that John was scared to death. He fell over like a dead man, is what it says. He said, I fell like one who became dead. And yet Jesus still comes over and puts his hand on John's shoulder and says, hey, buddy, it's still me. I know I look different, but I'm still the same Jesus. Get up, let me help you. Still has that same tender heart and compassion, but he's terrifying. And if you read that account of Jesus, and when John sees Jesus coming, go back and read Daniel. When Daniel sees Jesus, he sees the heavens open and the throne set in place. He says the exact same thing that John says in Revelation. If you go back and read in Isaiah chapter 6, and it talks about, I saw God in the temple high and lifted up, and the train of his robes filled the temple and smoke. He says the exact same things. It's amazing how over thousands of years, every description of Jesus in his glory is exactly the same. Different men in completely different cultures. You can think about it. We are closer to the time of Jesus, right, than John, writing at the end of the 1st century, was to Isaiah. Now that's hard to fathom, but God does not change. He stays the same generation through generation. When Moses asked, well, what's your name? Because I don't know what to call you, so people aren't going to believe me because I don't know what your name, right? It's a really stupid excuse, but he used it. You got to give him credit. What does God say my name is? He says, I am, right? I am that eternal constant, past, present, future. We see again, you are he who was, who is, and who is to come. He never changes. I like the illustration, the name Yahweh. Yahweh. Breathe in, breathe out. I am constantly with you, like the very breath in your lungs. He is always present, every moment of every day. God is there. And so we see that beauty continued on through the first 3 chapters of John, or of the Revelation. And I find it beautiful. I'll have to try and bring it in. There's a picture, and you may have seen it if you're on Facebook. All the cross references in the Bible. Anybody seen that picture? It is amazing. So what they do is they take the Bible, right? Every verse in the Bible is laid out at the bottom on a chart. And every time that verse references another verse, they draw a line. You might as well just take a smear and go like this across the whole page. There are so many references in the Bible to the Bible. I mean, it's fantastic. God's word does not fail. God does not fail. He is always the same. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He is who was, who is to come. That is our God. And it is beautiful. So again, if you have not read the first 3 chapters, go back and read the first 3 chapters. It won't take you real long, 15, 20 minutes. They're not real long chapters. If you read one section a day from now until next week, you'll have it all read. All right? So let's talk about the end. We talked a little bit about eschatology. So when I talk about the end, what am I talking about? Now, eschatology is a study of the end. That's what you and I are doing right now. We're doing eschatology. That's a big theological word. You can put that in your pocket. Sounds great on a college paper, but don't ever use it anywhere else because no one knows what you're talking about. Okay? When are the last days?
The end of the church age.
Okay, the end of the church age.
We're living in the last days, aren't we?
Okay, someone say we're living in the last days.
It really been since Jesus left.
What's that?
I said, really been since Jesus left.
Since Jesus left? I think it's both, yes. I think, yes, it does refer, we talk about the last days, the end of the age of the church, but I think the end of the age of the church is also the end of history.
One of the dispensations, isn't it?
Well, yeah, if we were talking about dispensationalism, one of the dispensations, that's a view that we'll talk a little bit more about in the future. But yeah, the dispensationalists would say that there are different periods of history, different dispensations. There's one, here's the other, and within that dispensation, certain things happen. And when that thing stops, it's done. We go on to the next dispensation. Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong in that, Freddie.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, it's like Section A of history, Section B of history, Section C of history. Okay, so whichever dispensation we're in, this is what it looks like. And so, I personally, when I look at the last days, and again, this is me. This is how I understand things. I think that's part of it. The end of the church ages is part of that. But if we look at Joel chapter 2, verse 28 through 32, I'm not going to read all of that. Just going to give you a little nugget here. Again, context. Go back and read it on yourself. You have it on your paper, so you can go back and research. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Well, when did he pour out his spirit on all people? At Pentecost, right? Acts chapter 2. He poured out his spirit on the whole world, right? There was a sound of rushing wind, tongues of fire came down, the disciples spoke, 3,000 people were added to their number that day. So the church grew from 120 to 3,000, or 3,120 approximately. Now that was a good sermon. I have preached a lot of sermons. I have never preached one that converted 3,000 people in one day, all right? And maybe you would argue that's because of the absence of the Spirit there, preachers. A little conviction on my head. All right, so I can always do better. But 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, etc., etc., etc. Do we see that in our world today? Yeah, I think so. It has gotten worse. Generation to generation has gotten worse. We can look at the moral values of each generation just in the last century. The moral values from the silent generation to the greatest generation to the boomers to Gen X to the millennials to Gen Z, Gen Alpha, over a course of 100 years, what was valued at 1900 was almost abhorrent in 2000. I can't believe they're living that way. If you go back to the Wesleyan discipline and say 1900, if you chewed bubble gum, you were going to hell. If you went to baseball games, you were going to hell. You were a bad Wesleyan. If you saw, God forbid, one of those devil-ridden, God-forsaken moving pictures, may God have mercy on your soul. Why? Because it wasn't a good use of your time. When you were sitting there in that movie watching someone get shot on a Western page, you could be telling someone about Jesus. Right? There are better things to do than to waste your time. Things have changed. Some for the good, right? There are some things with some baggage we can get rid of. Kind of that Pharisaical things that Jesus said, hey, this is your law, not God's. Okay, those things were good to get rid of. But now look at the divorce rate. 1900, it was like 0, maybe 1%. It was rare. Now, even within the church, over 50% of marriages end in divorce. I'm not pointing fingers. Again, I come from a broken home, right? My mom and dad got divorced. She was a pastor's kid. You'd think they'd know better, but right, here we are, okay? Life happens. It's just something that it's now, we just don't talk about it, right? Abortions. 1900 abortions were almost unheard of. Even in super progressive liberal circles, it was like, oh my gosh, we don't do that. Have the kid and give it up for adoption. And now, it's celebrated and encouraged. I mean, it's become the core of the women's rights movement, the ability to kill off our children. Somewhere we've gone wrong, right? But we see this, these last days, well, okay, here it is. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 18, he says, Dear children, this is the last hour. And you have heard that the Antichrist is coming. Even now many Antichrists have come. This is how we know that it is the last hour. Now, there's two things in this, right? First, there's a sense of urgency here, isn't it? John's gone from the last days. John says this is the last hour. We're in that last moments of human history. We're in that unraveling of time. We have an urgency to carry out the gospel message. Secondly, I want to point out, this is the only place in the Bible where the word Antichrist is used. It is not used in the book of Revelation at all. Okay? So let's open our minds, take out the Jerry Jenkins, Tim LaHaye left behind. There's no Nikolai Carpathia Antichrist. There is a figure in Revelation that bears some resemblance to the Antichrist, but he is not the Antichrist. Antichrist come out of the church, not the European Union. It's not a government figure. Antichrist come out of the church and pervert a doctrine about Christ. They lie about Jesus, like saying, well, Jesus just loved everybody. He wouldn't send anybody to hell. Well, I agree he wouldn't send anybody to hell, but he would certainly let them choose to go that direction, right? He doesn't care if they're gay and they're having gay sex all the time. He just loved them anyway. Okay, that's an Antichrist statement. That's someone who's come out of the church. You could go to a Methodist church and you'll hear this, right? It's okay to be gay.
I did that pretty well.
I grew up in an arts town, dude, okay? And again, I'm not saying I hate gay people. I'm not saying everyone who has that inclination is going to hell. What I'm saying is that's that progressive nature. Jesus just is going to do this for everybody and no one's going to go to hell. Well, no, that's not what the Bible says. It's not what the Bible teaches. And yet people coming out of the church are teaching these things as truth. Those people are, by definition of John, antichrists. And he says their appearance within the church is evidence that we're in the last days, the last hour even. So I don't want us to confuse the last days, this period in which we find ourselves, I believe, as the last day, right? When the heavens are opened and God brings all people before the throne of judgment, right? We all go to heaven, sheep and goats kind of moment, okay? That's the last day, end of human history. When we talk about the last days, we're talking about this time period, this dispensation, if you will, of the end of human history. And again, there's a sense of urgency. And so what are we called to do? We're called to preach the word. That's what he says to the church. You have a mission to do. The time to carry out that mission is getting very short. Right? We all know that as the older you get, the quicker time goes by. I'm 37. I didn't think time would move this fast until I got old. Okay? Yesterday was Christmas. I'm like, what happened? Right? We get in the habit, day in, day out, we get in the grind. Well, he didn't call us to grind. He called us to be the salt and the light. He called us to make a difference, not to be just like the rest of the world, but to be different, to be the best that the world has to offer, to make the world a more beautiful place. How do we do that? We preach the word. We share the gospel message. That's why we're here. When we share the gospel message, we honor God and we honor others. And I know it's not a popular message. If we're preaching the message that got Jesus crucified, it's not a popular message. Okay, if people just, oh yes, that's such a wonderful story. You're probably not preaching what Jesus was crucified for. He was crucified for the truth. When Pontius Pilate asked him, why are you here? He said, for this reason I have come, to bear witness to the truth. Well, what's the truth? That God sent his only Son to die so that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life, right? That's the truth. But there's a caveat with that. If I'm on the wrong side of the cross, I have to answer for my sinful nature. I have to do something. I'm obligated to make a choice. I can't just keep living in ignorance. Now I have to make a choice. People don't like that. So I have a very poorly drawn picture here from Paint. You guys remember Paint from Microsoft? That may kind of help explain what we're talking about. So we think about eternity. Eternity is separate from time. Okay, when I say God is eternal, God is here. Time is here. Past, present, future. God sees it all. Right? He is not stuck in time with us. What we see is time of creation, right? God created the heavens and the earth. For us, that's when time began, right? And from that moment, we've been stuck in time. We are, as C.S. Lewis said, we are amphibians. We are eternal souls trapped inside of temporal bodies, okay? Creation, all of history ramps up to the cross of Jesus Christ. And when Jesus said on the cross, "It is finished," he meant it is finished. The war is over at that moment. Everything else from that moment is just a watershed until the end of time. We're kind of a footnote. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. We'll talk about Daniel. We'll talk, he says about times, and half a time, right? It happened, it's gaining steam, and then it's cut short. It's halftime, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that. But where you and I are, when the Bible talks about the last days, it's my understanding, and I think we're okay in saying this, that refers from the moment to the cross until the end of time. These are the last days. However long they may be. They might, by 2,000 years, we passed that mark. Might be 6,000 years. I don't know. God is patient, and he wants as many as possible to be saved. And I don't think it's about the length of time so much as it is the one who's in control of time. And whenever God says enough is enough, he opens up the heavens and steps out, that'll be it. We can't put a date on that, right? Even Jesus said, I don't know when that's going to be. Only God the Father knows. So we talk about the end of time. I think that's where we are, right? The last days. We are in the last days. Anybody confused yet? So as we move forward, we're going to tackle some big stuff. And again, we're going to tackle some stuff that not everybody agrees on, and that's okay. We're going to talk about rapture theology. We're going to talk about the tribulation. We're going to talk about if you're pre-tribulation, post-tribulation, mid-tribulation. We're going to talk about the millennial reign of Christ in the church. Okay, is that are you pre-millennial, post-millennial, amillennial with the rapture? We're going to talk about that. The 144,000, what does that represent? Okay, who is in the 144,000? If you come from a Jehovah's Witness background, that's a pretty big deal, right? What are the two witnesses? What do they represent? Who are they? Where are they? What are they doing? We're going to talk about dragons and beasts and hookers, oh my, okay? We're going to cover a lot of ground. And again, I'm not going to rush through this. I'm going to, like right now, 7:30, so we're going to wrap this up tonight because the praise team's going to come in here in just a minute. And I want to honor their time as well. If we finish the slideshow, wonderful. If we don't, we'll pick up right where we left off the following week and we'll keep moving. We're not going to go as fast or as slow. We're just going to, whatever speed we take and where we find ourselves in that comfortable speed, we might cover 3 verses a night. We may cover 15 verses a night. I don't know. So as you're reading, just keep reading around where we are. Read a chapter behind and a chapter ahead. Read it again if you've already read it. Okay? Read. And if you don't understand something, the Bible makes it very clear. Pray for wisdom. And the one who gives wisdom gives it liberally. Okay? God will give you wisdom liberally. If you pray sincerely, Lord, give me wisdom, he will give it. Some of you said, preacher, you should have prayed for that a long time ago. All right? Anyway, thank you all for being here tonight. Again, I know we have covered a lot of ground. Next week, we're going to pick up with chapter 4. And we're going to cover as much as we can. Probably focus on that first section of chapter 4. I forget how many verses it is. My Bible's sitting right there. But it should be pretty clearly marked in your Bible, the first couple paragraphs of chapter 4. Anyway, let me pray with you all. Father God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your perfect nature that is eternal, Lord. Past, present, future. Father God, you are the same. You never change. And I thank you for that. We live in an ever-changing world. And yet, Lord, you are that bedrock. You are that foundation that we can build our lives upon. In the midst of shifting sands, you will never fail us. And so, Lord, I pray that as we continue in this study, in the weeks to come, Lord, you will open our eyes, open our hearts, open our ears. Grant us understanding. Grant us wisdom, I pray. And draw us closer to you. Lord, we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, y'all, thank you. Be careful out there. It's a mess. Be safe. Watch out for deer. Watch out for puddles. And I'll see you next week. Hey, men, don't forget, this Saturday, 8 o'clock, if you're interested, we have a men's Bible study downstairs in the library. Coffee will be hot. Can't promise it'll be good, but it'll be hot. Isn't that right, John? May not be good, but it'll be hot.